It starts with a finger. Sharp, accusing, jabbing at the air with the force of a woman who's made a career out of belittling anyone who dares to challenge her. Kellyanne Conway, flanked by camera lights and framed by a glowing chyron, leans forward with a smirk, chased by venom. "Oh, please," she scoffs, voice slicing through the panel. "Let's not pretend getting a law degree makes someone qualified to legislate. Half of TikTok has a diploma these days." There's a split second of silence, the kind that crackles before impact. Jasmine Crockett doesn't blink. She doesn't reach for the mic. She doesn't raise her voice. She sits, poised, calm, like she's seen this movie 1,000 times before and already knows how it ends. Conway mistakes it for surrender. "You know, some of us had to earn our place in this arena," she continues, flashing the crowd her signature mix of condescension and fire. "Not just slide in on sound bites and social justice catchphrases." Murmurs ripple across the panel. A host shifts uncomfortably. The producers hesitate, hover their fingers above the mute button. But no one moves. Jasmine inhales slowly. Still no words, just presence. That's when the freeze frame hits. Voiceover. Nobody saw what came next, but what Jasmine didn't say shook the room. Rewind the tape. How did it come to this? 2 women. 1 network. 1 live broadcast. One drunk with legacy power, clinging to outdated dominance through mocking tone and louder volume. The other. A rising voice of millennial clarity, sharpened by grassroots battle and courtroom reality. On the screen, it looked like a simple jab. But for millions watching, especially young women, immigrants, and anyone who's ever been patronized for being too passionate or too loud while still being ignored, a spark was lit. This wasn't just political theater. It was personal. And Jasmine? She was done playing by their rules. But this wasn't just a media frenzy. It was about to become a defining moment in America's cultural war. In the days before the eruption, the tension had been building. Slow, subtle, undeniable. American politics, already fraying at the seams, found itself lurching between truth and spectacle. On one end of that spectrum, Kellyanne Conway, veteran political operator, queen of spin, a woman who turned gaslighting into performance art. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, first-term Congresswoman from Texas, unfiltered, unbought, and unapologetically black. They weren't just 2 women, they were 2 Americas. Conway had made a reputation out of weaponizing chaos. She didn't just survive scandal, she thrived on it. From alternative facts to smirking on CNN panels while democracy trembled, she'd learned the game wasn't about truth. It was about control. But Jasmine wasn't here to play that game. She wasn't raised in studios. Her schooling didn't come from green rooms and sound bites. It came from courtrooms, protests, and hard-won victories, in a state where being a progressive black woman in power is a story of daily resistance. And now, they were thrown into the same arena. The segment wasn't supposed to go viral. Just another Tuesday night debate on legislation few Americans had even read. But beneath talk of law degrees and policies, something deeper was happening. Something that the producers, the pundits, maybe even the panelists didn't realize at first. This moment wasn't just political, it was personal. Because for millions of viewers, this wasn't just Conway mocking a resume. It was another example of how women, especially women of color, are told they're too young, too angry, too emotional, too radical, too everything, while being stripped of the chance to speak at all. And Conway wasn't jabbing at a degree. She was poking at every immigrant daughter, every first-gen college grad, every woman who had to be 5 times better just to be seen as equal. And Jasmine, she knew it. She had faced it before, heard it in courthouses, on the campaign trail. even in whispered conversations from allies telling her to tone it down. But this wasn't the courtroom, and she wasn't about to tone anything down. Not this time, because Jasmine didn't just carry facts. She carried something heavier: the pressure of marginalized brilliance, the burden of being expected to remain polite while constantly being provoked. And now, in front of a live national audience, she was being baited, pushed to the edge. But instead of swinging, she just waited until the nation was paying attention. And when they did, Jasmine rewrote the script, because what happened next wasn't just a response, it was a reckoning. Long before the shouting match that lit up every timeline, Kellyanne Conway had already defined her role in American politics, not as a leader, but as a manipulator. She didn't rise through sincerity. She rose through spectacle. In the post-truth world she helped build, facts weren't fixed points. They were tools to be twisted, shaped, and spun until reality bent to power. From defending Muslim bans to minimizing pandemic chaos, her loyalty wasn't to country. It was to control. And if you trace her trajectory back far enough, you'll find a pattern. One that explains exactly why her clash with Jasmine Crockett wasn't just accidental. It was inevitable. She first entered the mainstream not as a policy expert, but as a media handler who could turn any scandal into distraction. She knew how to dominate airtime, interrupt opponents with a smile, and deploy phrases like poison darts disguised as punchlines. Eventually, she became the architect of chaos for a presidency defined by disinformation. She normalized the absurd. She rebranded lies, and along the way, she built a reputation equal parts brilliant and brutal, for silencing inconvenient truths with louder voices. Remember alternative facts? That wasn't a gaffe. That was a blueprint. When she stood on the debate stage opposite Jasmine Crockett, she wasn't just defending a viewpoint. She was defending a decade-long legacy of spinning power into immunity. And the tools? They hadn't changed. Condescension, dismissal, smirks masking threats, a masterclass in "you don't belong here," delivered with the polish of someone who never expected to be challenged, especially not by someone younger, blacker, and vastly more qualified. Because that's the tragic truth. Kellyanne didn't need a better argument. She was betting on the room already being rigged in her favor. She knew the cameras were rolling. She knew the averages still favored her. The white hair, the louder voice, the seniority, the legacy resume. She knew the game. And in that moment, she played it with full force. "You can wave that law degree all you want, sweetheart," she said, each word dripping with strategic disdain. But real power isn't about paperwork. It's earned. Earned. That was the word that cut deeper than any other. Because Conway wasn't just questioning Jasmine's credentials. She was tapping into a deeper well of cultural insult. The age-old implication that women of color only get ahead through shortcuts, tokenism, or political correctness. It wasn't new. She'd wielded the same blade against reporters, journalists, even other women on her own side of the aisle. With each TV appearance, she refined the technique. Not with data, but with dominance. Interrupt. Laugh. Belittle. Pivot. And if all else fails, dismiss. So when Jasmine Crockett joined that segment, Conway didn't see a colleague. She saw a moment, a chance to reclaim narrative territory slipping from people like her. But this time, the playbook was outdated, because Conway wasn't ready for what happens when the person you try to belittle refuses to shrink. She wasn't ready for calm, for clarity, for a woman who knew how to wield her voice like legacy wielded volume. And for the first time in years, that formula, Conway's foolproof formula, cracked right there. On high-definition screens across the country, the manufactured confidence began to unravel. Her voice grew louder. But even then, her control was slipping. She was playing her greatest hits, but the crowd had already changed the station. Conway had built her fame by dominating chaos. But now she'd walked straight into something different. Silence, poise, and a political weapon she hadn't faced before. Dignity. What came next would not only gut her performance, it would flip the narrative she worked years to control. Because Jasmine didn't just answer her insult, she dismantled the entire illusion. Before anyone ever clipped her mic drop moments or stitched her quotes into TikToks, Jasmine Crockett was just a girl growing up in Texas, where the air was thick, the politics were tougher, and dignity had to be defended early. As a child, she learned to speak last, but listen hardest. In classrooms that rarely looked like her, she earned every A not to impress, but to survive. Every raised hand was a risk. Every strong opinion came with a price. But she learned that truth, when spoken plainly, carries a kind of power louder than any insult yelled across a table. Raised in a working-class household, she understood what so many politicians never will: that justice isn't a talking point. It's a lifeline. That a mother working 2 jobs isn't a statistic, she's a hero. That the swagger of oppression hides in suits and smiles just as much as slurs. When Jasmine entered law school, she wasn't trying to build a brand. She was preparing for a fight, and fight she did. For tenants being thrown out of their homes. For clients who couldn't afford truth unless someone volunteered to carry it in. She didn't chase big firms. She chose public defense. Criminal courts. The overlooked, underpaid trenches of where justice either shows up or doesn't. In those courtrooms, she didn't learn how to debate. She learned how to argue like people's lives depended on it. Because they did. She cried in her car more than once, faced judges who called her young lady with a curled lip, watched prosecutors look past her like she wasn't there, until she made them look again. By the time she ran for office, she had already been underestimated in rooms far more dangerous than Congress. That's what made her campaign real. Grassroots. Grimy. Door to door. Not just slogans, but stories. She didn't rely on generational legacy or corporate sponsors. She built her support like her voice, brick by brick, from the ground up. When she was elected, she became one of the first Black women to represent her part of Texas in Congress. But what made headlines barely scratched the surface of why she matters. She doesn't speak for Democrats. She speaks for communities drained dry by both parties. She doesn't parrot talking points. She challenges them. From police brutality to voter suppression, she has questioned the status quo even when it's awkwardly dressed in blue. And that makes her dangerous to establishment figures on both sides of the aisle. You see, Jasmine Crockett isn't just fierce. She's intolerant of gaslight, that quiet, polished denial of racism. The professional condescension, the way certain people get called passionate while others are labeled hostile. She's felt that blade her entire life. So when she sat across from Kellyanne Conway, who tried, with her trademark smugness, to provoke her into a performance, Jasmine didn't smile politely. She didn't lash out either. She simply embodied everything that power can't hijack: command, poise, truth, because she'd spent her entire life preparing for this exact moment. A woman who'd been told not to be too loud, too bold, too smart, too black, too real. And yet she'd made it. Not by conforming, but by confronting. Not by erasing parts of herself, but by magnifying them. That day, Jasmine represented more than a resume. She became a reflection of millions who weren't invited to the table, so they built their own. And when she listened quietly while Kellyanne tried to bury her beneath sarcasm and strategic shame, it wasn't weakness. It was measured strength, because Jasmine understands something her critics never will. When history underestimates you, survival itself becomes a strategy. So in the seconds before she replied, before she went viral, before her words crossed a million screens, she wasn't deciding what to say. She was deciding how much truth the room could handle. And in that stillness, something sacred was loading behind her eyes. Not a comeback. Not a roast. Not a meme. A reckoning. And when she finally spoke, she didn't just make the room listen. She made them remember. It started as a segment on judicial accountability, but it didn't stay that way for long. From the very beginning of the live panel, Kellyanne Conway had a look in her eye, the kind that says, "I've already won. Now I'm just here to humiliate you." She spoke first, as always, wrapped her words in velvet, then threw them like knives. Cynical praise here, a fake smile there. She'd mastered the art of slipping daggers between syllables. Jasmine Crockett was the only woman of color on the stage. Kellyanne made sure to remind us, without ever saying it directly. "I respect the Congresswoman's enthusiasm," she said early in the debate, with a deliberate pause before the word enthusiasm, as if it were a flaw. Jasmine didn't flinch. Then came interruptions, overlaps. Little snickers from Conway as Crockett attempted to explain the nuances of the bill in question. At one point, the moderator even asked Kellyanne to wait her turn, a rare moment of control in a segment slowly unraveling into spectacle. But Kellyanne didn't wait. She leaned forward. "Let's be honest," she spat. "This law degree she keeps waving around doesn't automatically grant wisdom. Ivy League doesn't always equal intellect," gasps. One voice in the background muttered, "Wow." Conway knew exactly what she was doing. The smirk had faded. Now, the gloves were off. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was an ambush dressed as commentary. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, not breaking, just watching. "See," Conway pushed on, "there's a difference between performing politics and understanding the system. And frankly, this isn't TikTok. It's Congress." She even chuckled at her own line. The room stiffened, and then Conway delivered the kill shot, at least in her mind. "Maybe if you studied a little harder, Jasmine, you wouldn't be so defensive about that degree." Silence. For half a second, everything stopped. Jasmine's expression didn't change, not even her breath. But the air in the studio shifted like the moment before a storm hits and the wind forgets how to move. Cameras tightened. Phones started recording. Even the panelists leaned back. Conway leaned in. She thought she'd landed the blow. She had no idea she'd just set Judith's blade in Jasmine's hand. The women watching at home, those who'd walked into rooms filled with less qualified men mocking their degrees, their voices, their names, they felt their bones tighten. It was no longer just about Jasmine. It was about every daughter of the margins who's ever been talked down to by entitlement in heels. And Jasmine? She was still quiet, still composed, still waiting. But not for long. Because what came next would turn that segment into a seismic shift, and Kellyanne's arrogance into a permanent footnote. The silence after Kellyanne's insult could have shattered glass. No interruption, no clapback, no gasp from Jasmine Crockett. Just a moment so thick even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Then she lifted the mic, slowly, deliberately, like she wasn't just answering a question but delivering a verdict. She didn't shout, didn't smile, didn't look at Kellyanne. She looked into the camera, past the lights, past the studio, into every home that had seen this dance before. And then she spoke. "You know, Kellyanne, I've learned something in courtrooms that you can't learn in war rooms." Her voice was calm, controlled, measured, like every word was chosen not just to counter, but to cut. She turned slightly, still not looking at Conway. "You think volume equals value. That if you interrupt enough, project enough, roll your eyes with enough elegance, the truth will fold. She paused for half a second, just long enough to let the silence grow again. It doesn't. Now she looked at her, direct, unshaken. I don't waive my law degree, Ms. Conway. I earned it, while working jobs, while caring for my family, while being told I was too ambitious, too loud, too black to ever be taken seriously. The panel's moderator stammered, "Congresswoman, if we could keep it—" Jasmine held up a hand. Not to him, but to the moment. I sat through professors who couldn't pronounce my name, interned in offices where they asked if I was the paralegal, and I still passed the bar in a state that barely wanted me to exist. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. I don't perform politics, she continued. I survived it. Long before I stepped into this chamber, I had to fight for every inch I took. At this point, Kellyanne's eyes were darting, lips pressed tight. No smirk now. No side comment. No market-tested zinger. Jasmine went on. You talk about understanding. Systems. The systems I understand are the ones built to stop girls like me from ever sitting beside women like you. Another pause. Then the line. The one that was clipped, remixed, subtitled, quoted. You yell to seem right. I speak because I am. A beat of silence. Then another. And then one thunderclap of applause from off-camera. Studio crew, staff. Even a panelist in the far corner let out a breath like they'd been holding it for minutes. Conway shifted in her seat. For the first time she looked visibly rattled. Her fingers touched her earpiece, fumbling for a rebuttal. But none came. Because the moment didn't belong to her anymore. At that exact second, Twitter lit up. Phones buzzed. Jasmine Crockett just ethered Kellyanne Lev. She's got that courtroom smoke. Congresswoman Queen Energy activated. But Jasmine wasn't done. She leaned forward, voice dropping even softer, almost like addressing every viewer personally. In a world where truth has been twisted into performance art, where gaslighting passes for debate, I didn't come here to yell. I came here to clarify. Kellyanne blinked hard, looked to the moderator, but Jasmine's words had already swallowed the moment. This degree doesn't intimidate me, Ms. Conway. And your volume doesn't either. Because I don't answer to legacy power. I answer to people who are never in these rooms and still carry this country on their backs. Boom. Not angry, not smug, just honest, sharp, unapologetically transparent. It wasn't just a takedown, it was a redirection, a refusing of the frame altogether, and at that moment, millions watching at home saw what so many have lived. That sometimes dignity, controlled, measured, fearless dignity, is more terrifying to the powerful than any scream. Kellyanne tried to smile, but it didn't land. She shifted, adjusted her blazer, cleared her throat. Wow, that's a lot of emotion. Jasmine didn't even blink. She turned back to the camera. And that, she said firmly, is how you try to reduce us. Call clarity, emotion. Call lived experience, bias. Call resistance, anger. But what you really mean is, we're not controllable anymore. And that was it. The final thread snapped. The moment that would be played across major networks before the show even ended. The monologue clipped into 100 activist reels. The quote emblazoned on T-shirts, stickers, and classroom walls. The mic still in her hand. The room silent. Not because she was loud, but because she was undeniable. Before the outro music of the segment even played, the clip had already escaped. It jumped the YouTube live stream, broke free from network servers, and hit timelines like an earthquake. Within 7 minutes, the words, "You yell to seem right, I speak because I am," were being quoted, subtweeted, TikToked, and stitched with stunned gasps and standing ovations. Jasmine Crockett started trending globally within the hour. On Twitter X, it came with declarations. This wasn't a clapback. This was a classback. She told the truth like she was filing a motion. Bro. She dismantled Kellyanne like a courtroom opening statement. Instagram turned her calm pose into a meme template, side by side with screenshots of Kellyanne mid-eye roll, open-mouthed but speechless. TikTok. Creators lip-synced Jasmine's now iconic closing line, dressing it up with slow-motion edits and gospel choirs. Students in dorm rooms, makeup artists in full glam, black women in scrubs and uniforms mouthing, "I don't answer to legacy power." Activist. Groups and media pages posted full transcriptions of her statement. Political commentators called it the most pivotal viral moment of 2025 debates so far. AOC reposted the clip with a single emoji. Angela Rye called it surgical. MSNBC ran a follow-up within hours titled "The Crockett Check: How Class, Grace, and Facts Shut Down Political Gaslighting in Real Time." Celebrities chimed in. Zendaya tweeted, "That delivery, that control, that's how power moves." Michaela Cole shared the clip with the caption, "Not every battle needs noise. Sometimes the silence is the revolution." And behind it all, something else was swelling. Something invisible but unmistakable. A shift, because this wasn't just about one woman defending her degree. It was about the levels underneath the insult, the years of being talked over, the eye rolls masked as debate, the coded language hidden behind intellectual snobbery and media polish, and for every viewer who had ever been made to feel small for being too passionate, too smart, too other, this wasn't a moment. It was catharsis. In the aftermath, think pieces flooded the morning feeds. Respectability politics. Just got torched, and thank God. Black women shouldn't have to be calm to be believed, but Crockett used calm as a weapon. Conway lost before she spoke. She just didn't know it yet. Even Republicans on the panel admitted, mostly off the record, that Crockett owned the room. Some even confessed to rewatching it in private. Agree with her or not, her impact was undeniable. The team behind Conway stayed silent. No follow-up statement. No damage control press release. "There's nothing to clarify," a staffer told one reporter. "It's better not to amplify." Too late. The people had already done that. Meanwhile, Jasmine? She released one tweet. "Power doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be true." And that was it. No whirlwind press tour. No gloating. No interviews that night. Because she didn't need to chase the moment. She had become the moment. In classrooms, teachers pulled up the clip as part of debate units. Social studies teachers paused on the line about legacy power. Civil rights organizations added it to speaker reels. Across the country, young girls, black, brown, immigrant daughters in hijabs and braids and curls, rehearsed those lines in bathrooms and bedrooms like auditions for a future they could now taste. The ripples had started, and they weren't ending anytime soon. Days after the debate, the saturation faded from the headlines. The thumbnails changed. The feeds moved on. But the feeling? It lingered, that exchange. 10 minutes of airtime, one calm voice, had cracked open more than a political talking point. It had revealed something deeper, a hunger for leadership that doesn't yell, dismiss, or perform outrage, but reveals truth with grace. Jasmine Crockett became more than a trending name. She became a template for how to fight without folding. She didn't win because she fired shots louder. She won because she never surrendered her center. In a country where certain people are expected to prove their worth twice before they're heard once, she asserted something revolutionary. That calm isn't weakness. That dignity is resistance. That truth, spoken plainly, is the most feared sound in any room built to ignore it, across. Interviews? She was asked. Did you plan it? Did you rehearse it? How were you so composed? Her answer was always the same. I didn't come there to perform anything. I came as myself. But that's what made it hit so hard, because what Jasmine brought to that studio wasn't strategy. It was truth earned through survival. She didn't have media coaches whispering in her ear. She had life experience. She had courtrooms where names were mispronounced and raised voices dismissed. She had learned long ago how to spot the difference between attention and respect. And now, on one of the most visible stages in America, she refused to trade one for the other. That moment became a reflection for so many. For the black student, who gets told to calm down during class debates. For the daughter of immigrants who's told her accent disqualifies her intelligence. For the social worker, the nurse, the public defender, who gets passed over or drowned out by voices that are louder, but never braver. Jasmine's reply wasn't just televised, it was internalized. She held space for the watchers, the quiet fighters, the ones who don't scream because they don't have to. Because here's what Kellyanne Conway, and so many like her, never understood. You can't reduce someone who's already whole. You can't shake someone whose truth isn't taught. It's lived. You can't undermine someone trained by struggle, not studio lights. Jasmine Crockett didn't walk into that debate trying to be a hero. She just walked in prepared. Prepared by every door slammed in her face, by every panel where she was talked over, by every doubt she turned into a degree, a career, a seat at the table she was never invited to but claimed anyway. In the end, it wasn't power that won the night. It was presence. And in an age of chaos, outrage, and spin, that presence did something we rarely see anymore. It made America listen. In a world addicted to noise, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. Jasmine Crockett didn't walk onto that stage to make a viral moment. She walked in with a truth so steady, it silenced spin. She didn't clap back. She clapped upward, pulling the conversations into something higher, cleaner, braver. And Kellyanne Conway? She didn't just lose an argument. She lost control of the narrative she spent years perfecting. The moment passed, but the impact, it's still echoing. That's the difference between politics and purpose. Because performance fades. Memes fade, virality fades, but values, they last. And in Jasmine Crockett, we saw values in motion, intelligence that doesn't apologize, voice that doesn't tremble, dignity that doesn't bend. So, what now? Now we remember. We remember that real leadership doesn't scream. It tempers the room with silence, then fills it with substance. We carry that with us. Into classrooms, courtrooms, boardrooms, and ballot boxes, because the truth is, this wasn't just Jasmine's moment. This was ours. So if you felt something watching that clip, if you saw yourself, your mother, your daughter, your future in her restraint and her fire, then this is your sign. Subscribe. Share the clip. Speak the truth. Join the movement. Not because it's trending, but because it's time. Because from this day forward, no one gets to tell us we're too much when we're finally just enough to be heard.